Go ahead.
Okay, all right.
Now, men's room is gonna be
Right
there.
there, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, in case you
yeah.
start to gag.
Coffee coming over, and I just never know.
Yeah. All right, well, David, I have two books, and they're right in front of you. The first one is Chasing the Dragon, and as Becky was telling the story, I don't know if you heard it. Like a lot of people, I started writing poetry when I was in high school, and it was pretty bad. And then I continued to write when I went to college, and it got worse. And then I went to graduate school, and it really bottomed out. Partially because I was teaching modern poetry, T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats and Auden, and I just realized I could not write like those guys. So fortunately, I eventually got out of academia. I taught at BC for about 20 years, only 5 full-time and then 15 in the night school. And Becky and I started our own market research company, and that was a better fit for me. But I would still write poetry very often 11 o'clock at night on an airplane flying back from San Francisco. So I had no intention of ever publishing, but Becky doggedly collected everything I wrote and finally convinced me to get it published. So I'm going to read just a couple from, well, actually 3 from this one. And Andre and David, feel free to grab a copy if you want and follow along, or you don't have to. I can just read it. Okay, the first one is called Continent of Fire. And usually I have a title to a poem, and then I have an epigram. The epigram for Continent of Fire is everything that rises must converge. If you know that line, you probably know it as the title of Flannery O'Connor collection of short stories, but she got it from Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit paleontologist. Continent of Fire. It begins here, the slow ascent of humpback rocks, trail muddy with melting snow, slipping underfoot, caking on boots, the New Year's sun gleaming through bare trees, the trail rising to the rocks, to the view of endless valley, rocks, trees, mountains, light, the face of eternity. Or is it here, gray rocks against the green of Ireland, green of rain, gray of suffering, rough, bare heels, or on the knees, the slow ascent up Kilpatrick, flesh brushing against gray rock, merging with red blood, sign of salvation. Or perhaps here, rough leathers nailed into rocks, straight vertical, viewing Machu Picchu, fear the only obstacle, the path open in English, Spanish, Quechua, to men, women, La Jolla Novas Una Droga. Now here, jazz, jig, or flute, sounds in the mountain air, or memories of the past, opening paths, pushing, pulling us to the same or different summits, in the Shenandoah, in the Andes, on the continent of fire. If you don't know Kilpatrick, it's a mountain in the west of Ireland where people go on pilgrimages every July. Here's one closer to home, the tides of Gloucester. The tides inches up the dock's ladder. The kayaks wait patiently. The kayakers less so. To live with the tides now requires a conscious decision. We're used to the time of Richmond, 90 minutes away. There, time is measured exactly by digital clocks that change automatically with the seasons, and we make decisions on what we think we know. Here, the motion of tides is less exact. Wind and rain work subtle changes in depth and flow. The tides allow the moments out of time, when the deer hunter's stand is empty and the mind flows free through the marsh. But the tides are more demanding than the clocks of Richmond. They sweep us towards the full tide, where we approach what we do not know. Not ashes to ashes, but ashes to water. And I was planning on reading this anyway. The next one is called Day of the Dead. And I was going to read it. Its usual inscription is for all the dead. And this morning I got word that one of my high school friends just passed away. So I'll dedicate this one to Ivan Stovall. November, the dead cling to us, or we to them. They speak to us in dreams of Halloween, in tiresome days of failing light, in the fog over the creek. They speak to us, but we cannot answer, constrained by time and place, cannot articulate the loss, the mourning unachieved. We cannot answer, so we wait. Okay, so that's Chasing the Dragon. Sleeping Dragons is a completely different book. Like I said, this is a collection of over 25 years, and it's, yeah, grab one of these, because Becky did the photography for this.
Cool.
You should look at those.
Thank you.
This one is a real concept book. We used to call concept albums back in the 60s. It's really based on two interlocking ideas. The first, that life is a pilgrimage, which is a stock motif of literature from Chaucer through, and of course endorsed by the Christian Church. But the second interlocking idea is that on that pilgrimage there are sleeping dragons, and it's best not to wake them up. All of that comes together on the poem. It's actually on the back cover. It's also in the book. But it's called The Eve of St. Agnes, which is a poem by John Keats, and it was illustrated by Harry Clark, the Irish stained glass master. The Eve of St. Agnes, sleeping dragons all around. Surprisingly enough, it all ends well, at least for the main characters. Frou and Madeline sneak out the back door, sleeping dragons all around. They ride off across the bog, presumably to Tenannog, the country of the young. It doesn't get better than that. But the dragons merely sleep. Dragons live forever. One day they'll awake, and there'll be a reckoning. So the book is divided into, if you look maybe the beginnings, that picture is County Wicklow. Glendalough is a monastery that was founded by St. Kevin around 600, not long after St. Patrick converted the island to Christianity. But the first set of stations after the beginnings are stations along the way. Ireland, that picture on page 5 or so is the view from the altar, which is the poem I'll read in a second. But I'll start with 100 Kings in Ireland. The epigram is, I wish I were in Carrickfergus. The last lines are by W.B. Yeats. All roads lead to terror, and perhaps one high king there. But 100 kings ruled old Ireland, and over 400 gods, from Lug and Bridget, the Tuana de Dan, a god for every rocky crag, river, and tree, and perhaps one high god beyond them, drawing like the shamrocks of the field, a land alive and magical, to be sated and enjoyed. The time runs on, cries she, come and dance with me in Ireland. And if you flip over, there is a view of the altar, which is a dolmen in Maidenhead Peninsula of Ireland.
We were actually driving to get to Maidenhead, which is the southernmost point from the altar, and I saw this sign, and I'm going, I don't know what that is. Pull in here, and we pulled in, and we're looking, and gorgeous view, But we're going, where's the altar? Where's the altar? And finally, I look kind of around the corner and up a hill, and there it is. And we were the only ones there. And it was a beautiful day for at least 10 minutes before the rain started. But,
The way you tell the weather in Ireland is you turn around, and if you can see the hill behind you, it's going to rain. If you can't see the hill, it's already raining. Okay, this is the altar. Dolmens stand everywhere in the west of Ireland. Before the coming of St. Patrick, before the Tuatha De Danann, our ancestors built them like the one near Mizenhead. Huge slabs of rock supported by columns of rock, generally horizontal, but tipping upward towards the sky, suggesting eternity. Here our ancestors buried their ancestors and prayed for them, initial rite of civilization. Not long ago, in the scheme of eternity, a depraved English queen outlawed the wearing of crucifixes, praying for the dead, and saying Mass in general. The Irish refused to become uncivilized. Their churches shuttered. They gathered here and in open places beneath the sky in the rain. The dolmen became an altar. Outlawed priests said outlawed Mass, and the Irish prayed for their dead, while below rocks were stained against the crash of the sea. And then if you turn the page, we actually get to Virginia, stations along the way to Virginia.
and that's our dock.
Yes, that is our dock on Wilson Creek. The first poem in that group is Maury on page 20. Maury Cemetery, which is actually where both Becky's family and my grandmother's family is buried. The inscription is in Latin, but I'll translate it. Visi sint occidis incipientum mori, which means, in the eyes of the foolish, these appear to be dead. The next lines are, A autumn in pacem, Saber, are at peace. The Romans plot is over, finished, done, filled up. My grandmother, the last one in, at 102. Mom and Pa, patriarch and matriarch, have promised me a place. 5 of 9 children will lie with them, and the occasional spectres, frank with melody. Hill over, done. But the past is never really over, or even past. A boxword needs trimming, graves need maintained. Becky and I bring flowers with the season, Christmas, Easter. We remember while we can. And on to Wilson Creek on page 27. Only our rivers run free from the wolf tanks. Wilson Creek flows over the marsh, joins the Wear, becomes Mojack, then the Chesapeake, the Bay of the Mother of God, finally the Atlantic, the encircling ocean we had sailed for centuries. From St. Brendan the Navigator down through the Vikings, to Greenland, Nova Scotia, then the Spanish, Basque fishermen, finally the English, who oddly enough restored Indian names to our rivers, to our bay. We sail them still in boats and kayaks, waiting until they run free at last. And then I have a group of poems. Oh, if you look at the picture on page 32, that's the view of Slieve Lake, which is up in Donegal in County Ireland. And I have a group of long rambling prose poems, including one about when I was teaching in the maximum security ward in Powhatan, Virginia. And the freelance pallbearers. I don't have time to read that, but and then finally, pilgrimages end up with last things. In the Catholic tradition, there are 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. I'm not sure how much I believe all of that, but as you've probably gathered by now, I'm Catholic, but my great-grandfather was a Baptist preacher. And so I want to read two poems about the end times, one from a Protestant point of view, from my grandfather's point of view, and the other from a more traditional Orthodox Catholic point of view. I would say that as a Catholic, I've met a lot of very holy priests and nuns, and maybe some others not so much, you know. But my grandmother, my grandfather's daughter, was the best Christian I ever knew. My great-grandfather was a circuit rider with 9 Baptist churches between Manchester and Flatbottom. But he settled in Powhatan, Virginia, founding a church, May Memorial, for my great-grandmother. She was 15, he 30 when they wed. Probably not a completely healthy relationship. But they brought 9 children into this world, and he made sure all the girls got some college. A remarkable thing in the 1920s. And he did something else remarkable. Part of the land he set aside for the church cemetery is reserved as consecrated ground for the local Catholics. Did he see me coming or what? I'm not really a stickler for consecrated ground. I'll allow my parents consecrated or not. But on my last day, perhaps he and my grandmother will lift me up to heaven. I'd like that. He has ridden his circuit, and my rambles will be over. And the last one I'll read is from the more Orthodox Catholic position, the Atticum, and the inscription again is in Latin. Hocus enum corpum meum, which are the words that all of the mainstream Christian churches use at consecration. This is my body. We get it from St. Paul, who said, I pass on to you what was entrusted to me, that on the night he was betrayed. Some of you are not Catholic, maybe you have to explain something. My home parish is a liturgical nightmare. There are no meals, an inconvenience for a generation taught to kneel. Worse still, the tabernacle is at the back of the church. So entering the church, one either reverences the sacrament reserved, turning one's back on the altar, or one reveres the altar, turning one's back on God. And most of you have a visual image, I know, of Catholics going in and genuflecting either at the back of the church or as they go into the pew. Okay, well in the old days, that was considered reverencing the altar, but that was okay because the tabernacle holding the sacrament in reserve was directly behind the altar.
And that's the cup, the chalice, and
the tabernacle is actually where the wafer is stored in reserve.
oh, okay.
Okay, so now in this church in Gloucester, the sacrament in reserve is at the back, so you either acknowledge that, which forces you to turn your back on the altar, or you acknowledge the altar, which turns your back on the tabernacle. The church is God's own instrument to bring us back to Him. Sometimes it is an imperfect instrument. Still, the Mass begins, the crowd grows silent, perhaps devoted. Only God knows. The priest raises the elements. Some of us bow. We call the final communion Viaticum, literally one for the road. Every moment is a moment of death. Every Eucharist is Viaticum, meant to bring us back to Him, no matter how imperfect the instrument, which is actually written in Corpus Christi. And then there's a picture of me and Becky. And then there's some autobiographical fragment that talks about growing up in Richmond, Virginia.
And a picture of you kayaking
And
in Scotland.
Yeah, we did get that.
There is something.
Kayak.
Oh, yes.
Okay. That was 20 minutes.
No, really? Was
Yeah,
it?
yeah, that's what I signed on for.
Wait, we want to ask, but we get to ask
Yeah,
questions,
sure,
right?
sure.
Okay. When you were living in the city, did you feel like writing city poetry, or did you still think about mountains and streams?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a great question. By the way, put a plug for my website. On my website, I go back through each, or I'm in the process of going through and writing a little blog, you know, just a page or two on each of these points. And one of the things that forces me to do is to come to terms with questions like, I never really thought of that. I am very definitely a city person. I grew up in the city. Richmond is probably the smallest city I could live in. I'm more comfortable in New York and in Dublin, and yet my poetry has always been about nature.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah, I saw a lot of mountains, streams.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, as they say in Gone with the Wind, the love of the land, there's no getting away from it if you're Irish.
Oh, that must be it. There you go.
Well, and the thing that interests me is that Reyn will get up in the middle of the night, 2, 3 a.m., go downstairs to his computer, knock out a poem in 10 minutes, and come back to bed. I mean, it's just,
Wow.
they write themselves for him. When
Sense in here.
Actually, a lot of it happens in my head, but I won't get up for it. So that's the problem. I'm not gonna get up. Maybe I'll keep my computer in there.
I used to enjoy, Garrison Keillor,
Yeah.
who would read poetry on public radio.
Yes.
Yeah.
At 5:40 or 6:40, I think it was 5:40, about when I had to get up, with kids going to school and all. And, that's when I most appreciated poetry, listening to them.
Yeah, and one way he's kind of influenced me is, you know, like I said, I taught T.S. Eliot, I taught Yeats. I can't write like that. And a lot of people think T.S. Eliot really destroyed modern poetry because he's so goddamn hard to understand. And I want to be as far away from that as possible. I mean, there's some references in there, like, you might not know what Kin and Nine All means, but it's the land of the fairy people in Ireland. So maybe a little things that you don't know, but I mean, the poetry itself, I think is pretty direct to the point. I try to make it that way.
I couldn't begin to write one. So I admire what you do very much.
Thank you. It's like Sharon Dorsey wants some of us to get together and talk about how do you write poetry. I have no idea how to write poetry. I really don't. I mean, if these things don't come to me, they don't come. I can't sit in front of a piece of paper and say, go write a poem on the 4th of July.
the day that his grandmother died, we found out about it driving back from, what city were we in? Somewhere out west.
We're in Fauquier County.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's driving, and he said, do you have something to write with? I need to get this poem out. And literally 10 minutes later, I have a poem about his grandmother that he had written in his head while he's driving.
Yeah, that one's in,
That one's in
Chasing the Dragon.
And so it just comes in spurts, the inspiration.
Yeah, that was why, you know, I always joke that I finished the coursework for a PhD, but I never finished the dissertation. Actually, I never started the dissertation. My attention span isn't that long. That's why I like poetry, because it's, you know, most of the poems I read were about 30 seconds. The longest ones.
And it's the reason that our career works so well for both of us, because most of our projects were a month or less.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks to 4 weeks, that was it. And moving on to something else.
I had trouble switching from poetry to fiction because I could finish a poem, or at least call it finished, but I have a really hard time finishing fiction.
I I wouldn't know where to begin there.
I like short stories, those I can sometimes finish. Did you ever write